Israel Update with Gadi Tau and Mike Duran. Hello and welcome to Israel Update. It is June 6th, Friday, and it's been 1 year, 1 month, and 30 days. That is 1 year and 8 months since the war began. I'm Gadi Taub in Tel Aviv, and Mike Duran is not with me today, but we have a special guest. His name is Erez Winner. Erez, hello.
Hello.
Erez is a Brigadier General in Reserve, and he's the former Chief of Operational Planning in the Southern Command, which includes Gaza. And in this capacity, he was the man who planned the current ground war in Gaza. Erez, you are no longer in the army, though.
Yeah, I left, or actually my reserve service stopped about 2 months ago.
But you made the plans for this current operation. It's called Merkavot Gideon, the chariots of Gideon.
Exactly.
First of all, is your plan being implemented?
Unfortunately, not exactly. The basic element of the plan exists and being carried out these days, but the plan had three major elements. The first one was the ground maneuver. My plan considered much faster and simultaneously attack on the ground in order to move the population to a certain area in the south, and in order to leave areas without a civilian population, only with Hamas terrorists, no need to feed, no need to send any humanitarian aid inside, and just give them two options, either to surrender or to fight and to get killed.
So there would be a humanitarian corridor for citizens who will be evacuated to safe zones. And in the areas evacuated, Hamas will be starved until the actual fighters would be starved during the siege until they surrender, give up the hostages, and all the rest. Where would the safe areas be?
The safe area will be alongside the shore from, let's say, Netzarim corridor in the center till the Muasi in the south near Rafia. And this is something that we have done before, not totally. And the idea was to repeat that safe
this
area.
Is a total evacuation of the north.
Total evacuation of the north, exactly.
And the whole of the Gaza population in the strip on the beach from the Netzarim corridor, which, if you remember the map, cuts Gaza about midway, though Gaza is wider at the bottom and narrow in the north. I guess, Erez, this is about a third of the
40% of the Gaza Strip.
40% of the Gaza Strip will be the north will be completely empty, and then in the south, the population will be removed to the westward towards the sea, towards the beach. And how was the plan to house them there?
So here comes the second part. The second part is to change the unwisely way that we have treated the humanitarian aid during the last year. Instead of sending the trucks to Hamas hand and having Hamas control of the aid, using it to pay salaries to his people, using it to control the population, and using it to sell to the traders or to the market and get more and more income in his hands. Instead of that, to do widely what we started last week or so, handling the humanitarian aid directly to the population, using international companies like the JHF, who recently installed for that purpose, and using private security companies to avoid what Israeli government and the IDF chief of staff, the former and the current, didn't want the direct contact between the IDF troops and the population.
Why is that necessary to prevent this contact?
I don't think personally it's necessary. I think personally, and I thought that a year ago or even more, that if you are working in a ground, that you have a terror group and you have alongside the population, the only way to fight it, it's international military doctrine. Not everything is Israeli startup nation. You you conquer the area, you clean the area, you control the area, and when you do so, part of the tools that you use is a military regime or military temporary regime, at least for the first period of time when you still have the terror organization in this place, Hamas. As long as it's there, you have to use the military regime and you have to use your troops in order to do it. That's the fastest and the easiest way.
You know, it's the word occupation in Israeli parlance has been so politically tainted that the army is just refusing to use it. It was amazing that Herzi Halevi and, of course, the Gallant, who is part of the same milieu, I guess the anti-Netanyahu milieu, the anti occupation milieu, the anti-settlement milieu, the pro-two-state solution milieu. These guys, they can't say occupation. While occupation is not just a term with a political halo of evil, it is also a
Mm-hmm.
technical term for military rule over a territory. But the commands of the IDF, until I think Israel Katz, the new minister of defense, has used the term to occupy the area, but it was almost taboo in the army. Is that not strange for professional generals?
It's more than strange. I've said many times that if you would take a British general, American general, even French general, and you would give them Gaza as an
Challenge.
exam, yeah, and
Yeah.
tell them this is the problem. Please give me the military solution. They would all come out with the same solution. And again, we have discussed the first two legs of this solution. The first one, as I said, is the military occupation, if you're already allowed to use this word. The second one is to separate between the population and the terror, between combats and not non-combats. Not that the population in Gaza are all Zionist or in love with Israel. Most of them would be very happy to take part and to kill us, as we saw in October 7th.
Yeah, we have,
But
I have to say, we have polls about this. We know from Palestinian pollsters and public opinion surveys that the great majority of the Gazans, as well as the great majority of the Arab population of Judea and Samaria, actually supported, applauded the October 7
mhm,
massacre, even after learning about all its horrors. So yeah,
even
the
today,
population is not Zionist. Yeah, we can say that.
yeah, but still, in order to fight and in order to gain the first goal of this war, as the government has ordered the military to destroy Hamas as a armed organization and as a government. In order to do so, you have to separate between the population and between the terrorist, the actual terrorist. And there is a third leg, very very important, and this is the our understanding. And as Trump has very clearly and simply have said that, in order to change this Gaza problem, which is a long going issue that we have tried time after time to solve, the only way to solve it is to move the population elsewhere. Gaza is not worthy and is not built to people to live in underground tunnels, above ground demolitions and racks, explosives, and so on. So, in order to solve the problem, for the sake of those people in Gaza, and for the sake of the state of Israel, and for the sake of the entire region, the immigration plan, and most of the people in Gaza will be very, very happy to do so.
But
So,
temporarily, when you are pushing the population to the beach strip in the south, um, the food issue we understood. Where would they live? We are talking about 1 million and something people. It's a large population, 1.5 million. I
yeah,
guess is probably the right because the numbers are all skewed up by the Palestinian statistical authorities and the census. The Palestinian Census Bureau has a vested interest in inflating the numbers. Yeah. So, but I would say, is that a reasonable estimate in your opinion about 1.3 million, 1.5 million?
exactly. I think that this is the number, and the answer to this question is the first phase is to actually, well, like we're doing today, to bring the food to the households directly. Uh,
To the
you can
population, but
to the
will they live
population.
in tents? Will
So
will
the
the IDF build something for some shelters? How will it be technically?
So technically, the first step is that they come forward to those posts that the foreign company has built. They will get the box and they will go back home to the Moasi, to where they have stayed before. The second phase that should start very shortly is we are building camps in the back of those stations, and in those camps there are place to a temporary place for those people to live. And then the second step that hopefully, as I said, will start shortly is that there will come not just the household, not just the male, but the entire family that they will come. They will be scanned to make sure that there are no weapons, no explosive, and no actual active terrorists, and they will be moved to those shelters, to those bubbles. That it has been given many names during the last year, and there they will live temporarily in tents or in temporary buildings. They will get the aid, they will get the medical care, and from there, that's the most important part. From there, they're already ready and packed, some sort of a temporary bases. From there, they will be able to emigrate to any state or any country that will be willing to accept them. That's what's
I
still
have to say,
missing.
in the margin errors, because we mentioned the allergy that left-leaning generals have to certain terms. And Trump changed the terms of the debate because in Israel, if you there's a word, the radioactive word is transfer. And according to the left, transfer is a hard limit morally and is not possible. Of course, this only applies to Arabs. They didn't have a problem. We didn't have a problem. I was on the left back then when Israel disengaged from Gaza. So moving a Jewish population was fine, although it was, of course, far smaller than the Palestinian population. But then Trump changed the terms, and suddenly the Overton window was moved, and suddenly moving populations is again something that you can at least speak about. And here the Palestinians, I think, sort of just in terms of the terms and the ideological frameworks, the Palestinians laid a trap for themselves because they define themselves as refugees. They call themselves refugees. This is not the accepted definition of refugees according to the Refugee Convention of 1951. A refugee is someone with no place to live, on the run from their own country and unable to be resettled anywhere. And a refugee status is not something that you inherit. If you are a refugee, and after you find a place to be, you have children, they don't automatically get the status of refugees, let alone for generations. And the Palestinians count everyone outside of their idea of Palestine as a refugee, and of course also everyone in Gaza. So even if you have Jordanian citizenship, which is the complete opposite of being a refugee, is residents with citizenship in a country, they define themselves as a diaspora of refugees. And therefore, at least in terms of the ideological war of ideas, Israel has a winning card here saying, look, you're refugees. You're saying you're refugees. refugees should be resettled. This is the moral obligation of the international community towards refugees. This is why there's a commissioner for refugees in the UN. This is why there are agencies taking care of this. And the Palestinians don't have a part in the general UN authority for treating refugees. They have UNRWA, which is an institution designed to preserve the refugee status. And so it has preserved the refugee status in the eyes of the international community. So Israel can now say, look, we're going to help you resettle. I'll add, before I hand it back to you, Erez, also the fact that the Palestinians, at least a great number of them, also want to immigrate out of Gaza. And so the moral barrier that was erected inside the Israeli political fight has been much eroded, and the door for a resettlement opened. So you're saying, Erez, the housed population in the southern beach strip will live in temporary camps. I'm guessing tents. Am I right? Tents.
Yeah.
Ohalim? And with a view to resettlement outside of Gaza later on. Yes.
If we really want to solve that problem, I wish to say three things in your permission. First of all, again, if you talk about historical lesson learning from world and conflicts around the world, most of them have been solved by the same solution. After the World War One, Turkey and Greece have moved tens of millions in population in order to solve their conflict between them. It also happened in Germany, in Poland, and it also happened recently. 6.8 million Syrians have left Syria during the civil war in Syria and spread all around the world, mostly in Europe. So here, if we're talking only about 1.5 million people, the numbers are not so big as people try to frighten us. Nevertheless, for those who say, but that's going to be very, very expensive, as you have explained earlier, this international refugee
agency,
UNRWA, only for the Palestinians, have spent during the years billions and billions and billions of dollars on the refugee, or on the people in Gaza, not refugees, but that's how they call themselves. If you take the amount of money the international community have put into Gaza, you could stop now and give every man and women and child in Gaza $10,000, $20,000 in the hand to find themselves a better place to live, and it will be much cheaper than to try and to reconstruct all the demolished Gaza as it is today. So it's not a problem of legitimacy. It's not a problem of history. It's not a problem of money. What is the problem? The problem is that the world enjoy and wants to see this issue as an Israeli problem. As long as they live here and a war after a war, operation after operation, they rebuild, they put up all the money, they take this money and the constructions that we have sending into Gaza, and they build the tunnels, and they build all the explosives and rockets and missiles. And takes a year or two or three, and again, it's become to be an Israeli issue, an Israeli problem. This is something that should be stopped, and I think that, as you said, President Trump have seen that, because he's looking on the problem as a business issue, and the only solution that could really solve the problem is the immigration plan. And as you say, many of the Gazan residents will be willingly and happily taking part of this immigration if they will just have the ability. And the third thing that I want to mention, and maybe the most important, I'm going back to the internal arena here in Israel. This conflict is much more than just a war. It's much bigger than that. You've mentioned two words: the occupation is something that we are allergic to, This war is about define the the people who are saying for many years, only if we surrender, only if we retreat, only if we will give more land to those people, only if we will have the two-state solution, we could solve the Palestinian-Israel conflict. And on the other side, there are those who said for many years that our retreat will bring us to another retreat. That if you will bring here, as we did in Oslo Agreement, 40,000 armed terrorists, and you will give them weapons, and you will give them a territory to control, you will create a bigger problem, as we saw in the actual world. So this conflict is between the group that wants to see the two-state solution, the group that afraid from Judaism and afraid from the Zionist goals of having the country Israel, Jewish and Democrat country between the river and the sea. And this conflict is centered now on those days between, as I said, the two different opinions, and unfortunately, it's much bigger and much more complicated than fighting the Hamas.
I'll say here a word for our viewers and listeners who are not familiar with the internal Israeli debates or its Hebrew terms, that when Oslo was inaugurated, when Oslo was presented to the public, Yitzhak Rabin said, "Bli Bagatz ubli B'Tselem." Bagatz is the Supreme Court, which is often limiting Israel's ability to fight with a very wide interpretation of international law and human rights, setting limits beyond the limits required, say, by the Pentagon documents on how to fight a war. And B'Tselem, which is a human rights organization, and we know that human rights organizations in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict are not exactly concerned with human rights, but concerned with how to leverage human rights in order to force Israel out of Judea and Samaria and promote the two-state solution. That's why they are never interested in human rights under the Palestinian Authority, which was the philosophy of Oslo. So when Rabin said, "Bli Bagatz ubli B'Tselem," what the thought was that if we outsource Israeli security to the Palestinian Authority, Arabs have different standards, and they will be able to apply much more brutal, much less scrupulous means in eradicating the radical elements like Hamas. So the idea was that the Palestinian Authority will get more or less a control of a semi-state or a state in the making in return for ensuring Israeli security by cracking down on Hamas in a way that Arab countries crack on oppositions. So that was the philosophy of no Bagatz and no B'Tselem, but it turned out that the Palestinian Authority is much more like Hamas than it is like the IDF or willing to serve the IDF. And so almost from day one, they refused to employ the weapons that Israel gave them in the way that Israel wished. In fact, we now have a conclusive evidence of the participation of the Palestinian security apparatuses in terror against Jews. And in fact, when they speak in Arabic, then the PR people, not just gossip, say to the Palestinian population, PR people of the Palestinian Authority, that their people kill more Jews than Hamas in Judea and Samaria. They brag about this. But the Oslo framework is so deeply embedded in the IDF and in a much deeper way, I think, in Shabak, in the Shin Bet, that systematically the IDF and the Shin Bet, whenever there's a terrorist connected organizationally to the Palestinian Authority, they do not mention his organizational affiliation. Then you have PR releases that say the name of the terrorist and describe the terror attack and everything else, but do not mention his affiliation. Then, if your eye is trained, you would know that he is affiliated with the Palestinian Authority, which they still need to exonerate in order to keep alive the two-state solution, because the Palestinian Authority is now just a crust over a population that supports Hamas, and the only way that Hamas is prevented from slaughtering the Palestinian Authority personnel is because the IDF is there. So the idea is that the Palestinian Authority will root out Hamas in Gaza. They're unable to control their little mukata. They are propped up on the IDF bayonets in Judea and Samaria. So this fragile little corrupt organization, which is more like a crime organization than an actual political entity, this was Antony Blinken's vision. This would be brought back to Gaza and defeat Hamas. And the idea was, of course, that if you have a unified Palestinian leadership, then you can make a bargain with Israel and go back to the two-state solution. So, Erez, have we covered the three elements of your plan? If I follow you correctly, is ground incursion occupation, two, moving the population to the strip of the beach in the south of Gaza, and three, immigration. Is this the larger picture?
You summed that
Excellent.
Excellent. Yeah.
So how much of this is being implemented? What isn't? And what should we do in order to actually win this war?
So on the ground movement, unfortunately, we haven't operate simultaneously and firmly enough, especially in the north. We have left big numbers of the Gazans population northern from the Nazarene corridor, and the problem is, or actually two problems. The first one is that as long as they are there, it's more complicated to the IDF to fight the actual terrorists in the field. And the second one is, as long as they are there, we've been forced, or we've been in a need. I don't think that an actual one, but we've been forced to send humanitarian aid to this area. And when you send humanitarian aid to this area, of course, again, as we mentioned before, it's getting into the Hamas hand, and then the war is going to be longer and longer. And this is the opposite from what we need to do. So on the ground,
why is that so?
It's a combination. It's a combination. We do have a new chief of staff, but around him, the staff are still the old, and I think that misleading. We still have the same general in Kogat who are explaining the chief of staff that the international organization and the United Nations organization should still operate and still do the job that they did, which basically is to take the aid and to bring it to Hamas hands, or most of it. We still have the same JAG. That's the name.
Attorney. You mean
Attorney General?
The IDF Attorney General. I forget her. Brigadier.
She's not a brigadier. She's a major general.
Major general. So major it's the highest rank under the chief of staff, right? The Alufa.
Two-star general, if you want to make it simple to your American audience. I'm a one-star general. She's a two-star general. She's commanding a big form of attorney.
A jurist, lawyer David Forer, I'm sure you know him from television, actually said in one of the panels I was sitting, he said, Ifat Tomer Yerushalmi, the Attorney General of the Army, is the commander of the IDF, which sounds really strange. But he said, look, there's a very clear definition of what a commander is. Whatever she gets involved in, she has the final say. So she can forbid the chief of staff from doing something. So who is commanding the army? The attorney general. And if we've talked in this podcast endlessly about the Israeli juristocracy, here is a very clear example of why this is terrible. This woman, with her ultra lefty progressive views, is sabotaging our ability to win the war by interpreting international law in such a wide way as to disallow many of the operations that all armies, let alone the U.S. armies, do on a regular basis. Yes.
Yeah,
So she's still there.
yeah. I sat in the room many times when we have showed our plans to the chief of staff in order to authorize them, and her words against things that we have suggested, as you said, unfortunately, many times, were the final words. This is something you can't do according to the international law. I'm not a major in law, but I do understand international law, and I do ask and consider with people who have some understanding, including people who served in the military and served in this job. And I know that she is not working according to the international law. She's working against, not against. She's working according to her beliefs and her, as you say,
Ideology.
ideology. Exactly. So this is again a second thing. The third part is the General Nitzan Alon, who is the reserve general, who is in charge of dealing with the kidnapped
The hostages.
people, the hostages in Gaza. And again, he's saying don't maneuver, don't operate in this and that area because you will endanger the hostages. She is saying you cannot move the population if they don't want. So you have to leave them in. And then come General Rassan Alian, the Kogat, and is explaining
What is
you.
Kogat?
Kogat is the very weird Israeli invention. We're a startup nation. So that's a startup. After 1967, after the 6 Days War, since Israel haven't decided what she wants to do with Judea and Samaria and in Gaza, the new territories, they have established a mixture between governing between civilian governance and between military governance, and build up an organization under the Ministry of Defense. And this organization, during the years, became to be more and more friendly with the people that he was working with, which means the Palestinians. And this group, we've recently published, Colonel Professor Simoni and myself, in the JISS. We have recently published a long and a very wide perspective article about study about the Kogat and why it should be.
But it's an acronym, נכון? זה ראשי תיבות.
מתפ"ש, מפקדת תיאום פעולות הממשלה בשטחים.
It's the authority for coordinating the governmental operation in the territories. So yeah, it's a sort of it's a softened way to say that the military administration is becoming more and more like a civil government, and it's still within the army. So Kogat is also a how should I say, a hampering force, a force that is standing in your way of implementing the full plans.
They don't want to have different ways to bring in the aid. They want to work with UNRWA. They want to work with the organization that they're used to work with. Some of it is because of don't move my cheese. That's the way I'm used to work. Some of it is because they are afraid to be irrelevant if they won't be needed anymore, and some of it because this humanitarian aid, this humanitarian plan, is a multi-billion dollar business. I have a friend who said once about the peace agreements and peace process. He said this is not a peace process, this is a peace business. Many people earning many big dollars, being part of this international aid system, and people don't want it to
which
change.
includes UNRWA, the UN
Yeah,
Relief and Works Agency
USAID.
for the Palestinians, and includes the Matpash, Kogat, this administration that we just discussed, and includes other parts of the IDF, and includes international NGOs, and includes all kinds of companies, networks, and corporations, all of which are doing some kind of business inside and outside Gaza.
Exactly. So when you take all of those elements together, you understand why it was very hard to change or to move the system elsewhere. And I said I started with the first part, with the ground maneuver, and I explained why it hasn't been operated the way I thought it should be, and then the war was much shorter and and will end in I said 63 days, but actually between 2 to 3 months. The second part is the hostages. The fear of them being harmed by our maneuver, by our pressure on Hamas, approximately 20 live hostages, and according to yesterday, the release of or bringing back two bodies of two members of kibbutz Nir Oz who were
Yeah,
murdered.
there was just to fill in our listeners. There was a commando operation which managed to find and bring back two bodies of our hostages that were
From Khan
not
Younis.
buried but left in one of the tunnels.
Exactly. So the fear that our operational will harm the last 20 hostages who are still alive. This was the second part, and the third part is the or unwillingness, or maybe the disbelief that the actual new system of aid will work. So altogether, what we see now in Gaza is the IDF is moving too slow, and the result of that is that the war will be longer, and the result of that is that we see Trump losing
Patience.
his patience, because he has other things that he wants to work in our region. Either it's the Abraham agreements, either it's Iran, or other issues on the table. We have seen the internal conflict in the inside Israel, between those who say let's stop the war, let's give up, and only to get back the hostages, and from the people and from the government who's still saying no, we have to first decisively win this war and finish with Hamas, as I said, organization, military organization, and a government, and of course, I don't know if it will be in 3 months or in a year or plus, but the internal elections here in Israel, and if we will continue to do things slowly, the midterm election in America. So from all of those different ticking clocks, we need to operate much faster in Gaza.
So to conclude, there's a government in Israel, and so can't the prime minister say, "Look, we understand all your hesitations and fears. Nevertheless, this is our decision. Just go and do it." Is there any obstacle to Netanyahu doing so? Does he want to?
Unfortunately, yes. Netanyahu understand, I say, very early in, in this war, what we were discussed here about how you win and how you operate. And he couldn't force the military to operate and to actually conquer and operate a military regime, military occupation. Whenever he tried to do so, the army brought from the other side a frightened presentation of the number of troops that will be needed, the amount of money that will cost, and so on. And we've seen that even before the war. Whenever there was a discussion in the government about Hamas, about Gaza, let's conquer Gaza, let's do something that we think that should be done. Not just Netanyahu, even as was published, Prime Minister Bennett, the former Prime Minister Bennett, who wants to attack and to eliminate Sinwar before October 7th, didn't do it because the former Chief of Staff, General Kochavi, told him that that is too risky and he won't give his hand to carry out such a mission. And for people who learned about democracy and people who learn about how actually democracy should works, it sounds crazy. It
Yeah.
sounds something that you cannot believe in. But as someone who sat for many hours in cabinet meetings, I can tell you that unfortunately this is the way that things works in Israel. The security services has too much power. The government has too less power. The government don't have any element that could fight back or could give them more alternatives and more thoughts and ideas. There was a plan to do so after the Second Lebanon War, after the Vinograd Committee. There was a new thing that was built, the National Security Council, like known
Yeah,
in
like the
America.
American National Security Council. Yeah,
Exactly. But
it turned out to be a weak body.
yeah, it's a weak body that all along the years and even today never has the strength and the ability to be an opposite to the security organizations.
Yeah, and we'll mention to our listeners and viewers who have heard us discussing this many times on this podcast. Look what is going on with the attempt of the government to do what the law authorizes it to do, to remove the head of Shin Bet. And you see the Supreme Court intervening and the Attorney General, who is the legal counsel to the executive, vetoing the move, and there are threats and demonstrations in the streets. And we've just been through a slow coup when reservists basically stopped a legitimate judicial reform. So everybody's also shell-shocked. Erez Winner, Brigadier General in Reserves and former Chief of Operational Planning in the Southern Command, the man who planned the victory the victory strategy in Gaza, which is sadly not being fully implemented to this day. Thank you very much for this conversation.
Thank you.